Welcome, everybody, to the Contextual Christian Church Bible Study, where today we're going to read First Chronicles chapter 17, verses 6 to 19. I'm going to pray it in. So, everybody, bow your heads. Father, thank you for making sure we still got on for this Bible study. As today we're just furthering along with David's story here. With the context we're going to get in. I know it's going to be practice as every day is, but I pray that we're able to get the context a little bit faster today, and that this Bible study is as smooth as possible. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, so last time we had finished up chapter 16, but in the midst of it, when we first started, was in 37, and we left off with where David had set people in charge in front of the Ark of the Covenant to be in charge of different things. He set Asaph and his brethren to minister before the Ark continually, take care of its needs. Think like a nurse ministers medicine, taking care of the necessities of the Ark. And then Obed-Edom with his brethren, which is the same people that the ark was left at when they couldn't bring it to the children of Israel, but they were set up as the security guards guarding the area. And then Zadok the priest and his brethren were in before the tabernacle, and they were set up as the priests there, and to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord, and to do according to everything that's written in the law. So they were the ones that were supposed to be setting up, making sure it's all followed exactly as God had required in his word. Interesting the fact that David brought that up. Then Hemon and Yeduthun and the rest of the people that were chosen, but it pointed out who were expressed by name, bringing back to a group that we had talked about before, who had basically stood up saying, I will be the one that helps. I want to be one that helps. So by name, so like I Matthew want to be one that helps. I Chris want to be one that helps. I Charles, and so on and so on. They wanted to do this because, and they wanted to help out to give thanks and everything to God because of God's mercy and how it endures and how everything they've already been through is showing that. And then lastly, we had pointed out that what their job actually became was to do music in the instruments. And that the sons of Yeduthun, so the sons of Haman and Yeduthun, with instruments for those that should make sound. So the ones that were really good about doing it. But then the other sons, the sons of Yeduthun, became security. So we had people going into each part. And we finished up pretty much with that section in 43, explaining that how David returned to his house. Then we got into chapter 17, where we started off with the first thing that David was telling Nathan that he wanted to build a house for the ark because he has his own house that David does, but there's no house for God. All there is tents. But in response to that, what Nathan had told David is like, okay, well, you know God is with you, right? So anything you do, God is going to bless instead of getting an answer from God first. And then we got somewhat of an answer of God, which he told Nathan, the prophet, to tell David not to build him a house. And he said his reason for, or in other words, because I have not dwelt or I have not lived in a house since the day that I brought up Israel, brought them out of Egypt until this day, but have gone from tent to tent and from tabernacle to another. So, in other words, I never had a house built for me. I've just been going around in tent to tent. Why are we building a house now? That's one possibility as to why he said it, and it seems like that's why he's telling David not to do it. But that's where we left off, was with that explanation as to why David won't, as one possible part of the explanation. As today, we'll go ahead and continue, and let me go ahead and switch it to the first section so that Chris can read.
You hear me all right? All right, so today we're starting off in First Chronicles chapter 17, verses 6 through 10. Give me 1 second. Like, all right, verse 6. Wheresoever I have walked with all Israel, spake I a word to any of the judges of Israel, whom I commanded to feed my people, saying, Why have ye not built me an house of cedars? Now therefore thus shalt thou say unto my servant David, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I took thee from sheepcote, even from the following sheep, that thou shouldest be ruler over my
One
people.
problem, you got to restart because the first one was a question. You read that whole thing like a statement. You didn't even read it with any emphasis at all. And that changed the entire context. It is a statement. No, because it's a comma before that. That's not a separate sentence. That's all one thing. Remember, this is a continuation from what he had said to David.
Okay.
I'll explain how it
I
changed the context.
I got
Go ahead and reread it how you
I
were
got it.
reading it. Yeah.
Wheresoever I have walked with all Israel, spake I a word to any of the judges of Israel, whom I commanded to feed my people, saying, Why have ye not built me an house of cedars? Now therefore thus shalt thou say unto my servant David, Thus saith the Lord of the hosts, the Lord of hosts, I took thee from sheepcote, even from following the sheep, that thou shouldest be ruler over my people Israel. And I have been with thee whithersoever thou hast walked, and have cut off all thine enemies from before thee, and have made thee a name like the name of the great men that are in earth. Also I will ordain a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, and they shall dwell in their place, and shall be moved no more, neither shall the children of wickedness waste them any more, as at the beginning, and since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel. Moreover, I will subdue all thine enemies. Furthermore, I tell thee that the Lord will build thee an house. All right, give me a second before I explain. So first off, we have the continuation of what God is telling Nathan to tell to David, and essentially in verse 6, he's questioning, when has he ever told somebody to, like, why, of all the times and all the people that have been over Israel and nobody's built me a house yet, when have I said that? And then in 7, he's like, this is what you tell him, that basically I took you from, when I looked at sheep coat, it was like the habitat of sheep, so like a little farm spot, nothing real too fancy, actually like kind of like low class, real low type living. So I took you from that, and I took you from even being a sheep, following the sheep, and I made you the ruler over Israel, over the people of Israel. And I've been with you everywhere you walk, cut off all your enemies, and I made you a big name. I made you a like real big time name. And then in 9, he's saying, I'm gonna get a spot for the people of Israel, and I'm gonna make sure that they don't have to be moved from there, and that wicked people won't basically wither away and infiltrate at them as they were before. And then 10, let me make sure I get this right. And it says, since I commanded the time to be judges to be over my people. Basically, he's talking about, since it's a continuation of 9, basically, since those rulers that have been appointed and how they were all kind of tainted by wickedness and ended up doing wicked things, that he's not going to allow that to happen anymore.
Close, but not quite. Try that last part. The last part was where you slipped up. We'll redo 9 entirely. See if maybe rereading it'll give you the answer.
Also, I will ordain a place for my people, will plant them, and they shall dwell in their place, and shall be moved no more. Neither shall the children of wickedness waste them any more. As at the beginning, and since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel. Mm,
Now, what you had brought up was that the children of Israel would have wickedness in them, the way you phrased it. Yeah, you said that they would have wickedness, that there would be no wickedness in them. But that's not what that's saying. So maybe it's a phrasing issue. Oh, don't forget to unmute.
what I meant was that they won't be infiltrated by wickedness and the like outside influences to make them go into wicked ways.
No, that's where the slip up is. All right, Thomas, give you the chance.
Can't really look at the context, just listening.
Oh, okay. All right, Charles.
I'm still thinking about a way to re-explain it.
All right, what does the waste them mean, Chris?
When I looked it up, it said like to kind of let me pull it back up because I looked
Yeah.
at it earlier. To wear out.
Yeah. So did it say that the wickedness would waste them?
Oh no, the children of wickedness. So like I guess wicked people, people that are in wicked ways that I guess I want to say like the heathens, but I don't want to say like the heathens, but I think that's the only word that I can come up with that'll
Well,
kind
no,
of
heathen is someone who doesn't believe in God at all. You can be a follower of idolatry. That doesn't make you a heathen. A heathen is someone who has no understanding.
oh, so maybe just they're the evil enemies or something.
Yeah.
I guess that's the only other word I can
Ungodly
say.
people would be a good way to say it.
Okay.
So now go ahead and re-explain. Now that I give you that hint, it should be easy
So
now.
now no ungodly people will no longer like bring them down, tear them down, wear them down, whatever as what
There
happened in the
you
beginning.
go.
Okay.
See, infiltration is different than wearing down. Wearing down, I mean, think like on video games and stuff. If someone gets wasted, they don't get infiltrated and turned into a wicked person. They get taken out. They get wore out. They're taken over. So when it says that the children of wickedness wait no longer would they neither shall the children of wickedness waste them anymore. In other words, part of what he had ordained for the children of Israel when they get to the promised land was that nobody was going to be able to take them out and that they're not going to have to move anywhere. Now, here's the question. Was that without any prerequisites or was it without like a contract conditions? Was there conditions on this, Chris?
I mean, yes and no. I want to say no because it wasn't directly mentioned as of right now, as of what we have read. But there's been plenty of times where it's a commandment where basically you walk within my way, I will take care of you. But the moment you turn your back on me, there's going to be problems and issues.
Incorrect, but good try. Charles?
Yes, there are conditions. They still have to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. If not, and they turn away from God, then them conditions are cut. Everything's null and void now.
Good. And how does that not end? Because as Chris said here, we didn't read any conditions just now. Why does that not impact whether or not the conditions existed? How is
Why
no
do
an incorrect answer? Because he said yes and no. How is the no part an incorrect answer?
didn't we read in like previous chapters, with many chapters, on how there were conditions that needed to be met to have God's covering?
Exactly. That's the reason why, Chris. Now that we're at Chronicles, we're not starting the Bible from the very get go at this point. We've read throughout the Bible to the point where they've been in the promised land, been kicked out the promised land, brought back to the promised land, kicked out again, and so on and so on and so on. And we have read straight from the beginning the entire time that this protection, this hedge of protection that God gives, it's conditional. So it doesn't have to actually say it here if we take the context of the Bible and it's what from what we read already. So this is where it goes into the point I've said before about how the context is like a forest for the Bible. The initial words in each sentence is like the stems of a tree, of a leaf. Then the sentences in each verse are like the leaves to a branch. Then the branches to the tree is the chapter. The tree is the book. Then the Old Testament and the New Testament is the front and back section together making the entire forest. So everything connects. So if we've been from the beginning and got to this point reading in order, and it's always been conditional, then even if it doesn't specifically say it here, if it never comes up and says it's without condition, we have to assume that it's the same because it's not really an assumption if the context has always been there.
I get you. I just, I kind of played it safe with the whole, oh, if it's not mentioned here, don't say anything if it hasn't been said, but it has been said. That's why I said yes and no, but yeah, you get what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. But this is where it comes into a moment where
We already know that.
we already know if something is well established and we're going in order. I'll give you an example where it would be different, where what you're saying would be right. To look on a woman as if to lust after her, is that Old Testament or New Testament law? Charles. No, Thomas, since Thomas is listening. To look on a
Old
woman and to
Testament.
lust and you said what?
Old Testament.
No.
It's not
How you
Proverbs?
fail on a 50-50 shot? No, it's not Proverbs.
I could have sworn it said a bunch about that in Proverbs.
You said what?
I could have sworn it said a bunch about that in Proverbs.
No, not looking on a woman with lust, but letting the lust lead you to sleeping with her is what Proverbs talks about. In the Old Testament, the law required that you had to physically have sex in or physically get intimate in order for it to be a problem when you're in sin. It wasn't until the New Testament where you could be in sin just for your thoughts. That was a New Testament thing. Old Testament, the physical had to take place. So, with that in mind, if we read a verse in the Old Testament that does talk about lust, as you guys talked about, and we read and it talks about letting the lust dictate and control you. If I were to bring up or somebody were to say, like, okay, well, yeah, even if you're looking at a woman, this would show, we've read many times in the Old Testament, if you look at a woman, that you are already committing lust in your heart. Well, no, because they're in the Old Testament. So now you're adding a law to the law that did not exist. You see what I'm saying? So if we aren't going in order, if we're taking something out of order, then it's a different problem. You see that, Thomas and Chris?
Yeah, I understand. I actually didn't know that, which is crazy.
Yeah, I believe it's actually Jesus's words specifically. It's the same section where he talks about hating your brother without a cause, that you've already killed him in your heart. So, yeah. So at this point, we do have that. And the only answer is yes, it's conditional. So we have God bringing up to Nathan to speak to David about how, first off, When did I ever say that I needed a house built for me of cedars? So now we had a little confirmation of why God was telling David, and we said it's a most likely, but now it's confirmed. David was never asked of to actually build a house for God. God never required that. And he even brings up, when did I ever say I wanted one? I never did. So the need to build it was not there. But then in 7, he goes in and he says, now therefore, so basically, with all this in mind, you can go ahead and tell David this. I took you from the area where the sheep live. We know this also because David was a shepherd. Even from following the sheep, that thou would be ruler over my people Israel. Now, why would he bring that up, Thomas? Why would God bring up that David, in the midst of responding to David, why would he bring up that David was a shepherd that he brought to be over people, over Israel? Thomas, don't
Hello, can
forget
you
to
hear me?
unmute.
I got
Yeah,
a
now I
call
can.
right as you said Thomas. What was it that you said?
Oh, I said, why would God bring up the fact that David was a shepherd in the midst of him responding to David, telling him what he's telling him through Nathan? Why would he bring that up? Why does that matter to what God is saying?
In regards to the amount of what is the word? In regards to the amount of responsibility that he's going to have in future reference.
Okay, you're not able to focus on the context much. Make sure to take the time to re-listen to this later, because that made no sense with the context. And remember, if you don't remember the context, you need to say that so you don't waste others' time. It's not fair to other people if you're just answering to answer and not having something in context of mind. So Charles,
Oh, I don't know.
what? Okay, Chris.
Um, is it possible to say I've taken you from here to here and never asked you anything? Is that what?
That's a good try, but no. But that is a good try. What would you compare a shepherd's job to a king? Would you say that a shepherd's job compared to a king is looked at as a higher quality job or a lesser job, Thomas?
Shepherd's job compared to a king, less.
Yeah, definitely. Charles, would you consider a shepherd's job as humble beginnings or as standout, top-notch beginnings?
Humble beginnings.
Good. Now, the reason we can have this explanation is because of the surrounding information. We started off with God bringing up last time to David that he had been going all through these places in tents and never had a problem. And then he brings up in verse 6, not only that he'd been in all these tents, but when did he ever say he needed a house? So there's a common theme between these verses that is talking about humility and arrogancy and the comparison of it. And so he brings up how David was a shepherd. We're not talking about somebody of a royal family. We're not talking about somebody of high society. We're talking about somebody of the lowest of the low when it comes to job position. Might as well be a trash collector in comparison of today, and brought them to be the president. So when he's pointing that out in the midst of this context, he's continuing the flow of talking about how God does not seek the high-minded things, pride, or a lifting up in that way. God seeks humbleness. He rejects the proud and he gives blessings to the humble. There are proverbs that says that and other verses that show that. And so here, bringing up that David did, this is more of an explanation for David as to why he said no to David. I didn't bring you up from some rich family. I brought you up from some shepherd family. In other words, why are you trying to make it a big thing to make a place for me now? And then In verse 8, and I have been with thee whithersoever thou hast walked, and cut off thine enemies from before thee. So, in other words, you were a nobody, and I made you king over Israel. But even still, with the fact of you being nobody, I cut off all your enemies before you. And I made you a great name, a name that is great, of the great men that are in the earth. So I made your name so famous, and you were a nobody, and I never had a place of my own. Then in verse 9, now he goes in to say a new part. Also, I will ordain a place for my people, and will plant them, and they shall dwell in their place, and shall be moved no more. Neither shall the children of wickedness waste them anymore, as at the beginning. So, wait, as at the beginning, now we're getting a comparison to the promised land and when they first got there. So, I'm going to make a place for my people Israel. Even though they've been scattered, even though they've had these problems, even from the very beginning, like the Garden of Eden type. So I'm going to make a place, and they're not going to have to be moved anymore. Neither shall the children of wickedness be able to wear them out. And verse 10, and since that time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, moreover, I will subdue all thine enemies. Furthermore, I tell thee that the Lord will build thee an house. Now, when he says he'll build him a house, here's the question. And I'll go first to Thomas, then to Charles, then to Chris. Does that house that he's about to speak of, does that need to be literal, or can that be something else? And if that could be something else, what other possibility could that be?
Skip me.
All right. Charles?
Um, it could be. It's either or. I can't do both, right?
No, I said it doesn't need to be a literal house, or could it be something else? And if it could be something else, what else could it be?
Um, it could be both, but I got to think about what else could it be. The figurative part. Um, Let me think about the figurative part. Come back to me.
All right, Chris?
Um, I don't think it would be literal because this house is already built, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's a
David's house is
possibility.
already built, but I would say just like because I was gonna say like a place of worship or a kingdom as a possibility, like just build his kingdom up. But other than that, I can't think of any other possibilities.
No, that's a good response. Those are possibilities. They're not the only ones, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a house for David. That's true. Now, here's the thing, though, and this will go to Chris directly before we continue. Could it be another house for David that he's talking about?
It could be.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily, just because David has a house, doesn't necessarily mean that God isn't talking about David's house. We don't have the context at this moment to see if we're talking about David having a new house, because he could always have built him a new house and say, well, you're going to live here instead of the one you built. Now, there's there's a metaphorical version that could be an answer too. So the question would be, and see if you guys can figure it out, starting with Thomas, what would the metaphorical meaning be? Or one of them?
Wrong with the customers. Give me real quick.
No problem. Charles?
Metaphorical. Blessing, blessing of him, his generations, which, well, yeah, we read about that actually.
Yep,
Him and his seed.
exactly. And just as you said, we've read about that before. God has used the metaphor of a house to mean somebody's genealogy, somebody's family line, not a literal house, but their generations after them. And when he has said, I will build thee a house, what he meant at the time was a generation of foundation for his families. So there are three possibilities in here. Either one, God is being literal and telling David, I am going to build you a house for you, as in like a new house or set up for you. Or two, because David was asking to build a house for the ark, maybe God is talking about building getting a house set up for the ark, even with everything he said. Or three, maybe God is talking about building up a house as metaphorically, as in God will take care of David's children and he will establish some importance for however many generations or whatever set up down the line for David's lineage going forward, his family, his generations going on and on. Those are the options. And we don't have an answer yet, but those are the options. As I'll go ahead and switch it to the second section for Charles to read. But in the meantime, does anybody have any questions or comments before we continue? All right, then go ahead, Charles, when you're ready.
For this one, we'll be reading First Chronicles chapter 17, verses 11 to 15. I'm going to give it a couple seconds. Verse 11. And it shall come to pass when thy days be expired, that thou must go to be with thy fathers, that I will raise up thy seed after thee, which shall be of thy sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build me an house, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son, and I will not take my mercy away from him, as I took it from him that was before thee. But I will settle him in mine house and in mine kingdom, or in my kingdom forever, and his throne shall be established forevermore. According to all these words and according to all this vision. Matt, did you say something? Sorry, let me reread verse 15. According to all these words and according to all this vision, so did Nathan speak unto David. So reading through this first I'll explain it. It's talking about when David's days are expired. It's still the Lord's message to David, but when David's dead, basically, God is going to raise up a seed after David's seed, and establish David's seed's kingdom, set up the kingdom. Then that seed is going to build God's house and establish the throne forever. Now, when we already read about King Solomon building the house and going through all of that stuff, which I was about to jump on that. But then when I read, I will be his father and he shall be my son, and I will not take my mercy away from him, as I took it from him that was before thee, but I will settle him in mine house and in mine kingdom forever, and his throne shall be established forevermore. I keep thinking Jesus when I read verse 13 and 14. I was gonna jump straight on King Solomon and leave it at that, but right when I read 13 and 14, I'm thinking Jesus off the
What
bat.
about him?
About how we read about God or we've already read scriptures about Jesus being on the throne, Jesus's kingdom being established, Jesus sitting on the right hand of God, all of those things. I'm thinking about all those verses we went through in the past.
But remember, when it said in his throne, it didn't say that he will sit on my right hand. It didn't say that he will be on my throne.
I will settle him in mine house and in my kingdom and forever, and his throne shall be established. Yeah, so I got to go back to King Solomon then, which we've already read about God setting up King Solomon to be the wisest person in the land. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
giving him all these things and establishing his kingdom and him having all kinds of things. King Solomon has so much going on. So yeah, King Solomon is who verses 11 to 14 is getting into, and then with verse 50, which we read in the past, but we're going to read about Kings. There's a strong possibility we'll read King Solomon again. Verse 15 is just saying all the stuff that the message that the Lord had for David that was going to Nathan to tell David. He told Nathan told David. So yeah, that's the end of mine.
This is a perfect point of context of exactly what I was saying. I love how that God works. This is just hilarious. Charles, when you looked at this in verse 12, he shall build me an house, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son, and I will not take my mercy away from him. When you looked at that, you looked at the concept of father and son, but you didn't take into account there's more than one version of a father and son. Remember in verse 11, it said, and shall come to pass when thy days be expired, that thou must go to be with thy fathers, that I will raise up thy seed after thee. This didn't say that, like with the prophecies of Jesus, that I am his father, or that the prophecy will be a son. This said that David, after you die, I will be a father unto your son, and he will be a son unto me. See, because you didn't take in the surrounding context, I could see where your confusion and thinking is talking about Christ is. But we have to be cautious that we're not putting Jesus somewhere he's not, because that's where we get a lot of the problems where people get debunked and their churches get debunked. Why is it atheists have any standing at all in the world, Charles?
Um,
Realistically.
Realistically, don't they just they'll call out something that a fake Christian got wrong in the Bible, and the atheist
Exactly.
got it right, but the fake Christian got it wrong.
So the atheist will take things that the fake Christians take out of context, and they will prove the fake Christian wrong and how the fake Christian took it out of context, thereby debunking them as a believer and thereby debunking the faith itself. Even though it really doesn't debunk the faith, but from people's perspective, if somebody's supposed to be an authority on a subject and they're proven to be false, a lot of people will look at that subject as to be bunk, not just the person, the individual. So if we stop looking at the context and try to add something there that's not actually there, then we have a problem.
So for future reference, because I'm glad you saw that I was divided in my answer, because King Solomon was first in ultimatum until I got to the part of the father and the son, and then settle him in my house and in my kingdom. What are some other keys that I can look for so I don't get that wrong again? Because that was I've gotten context wrong, but this is one where this is kind of newer of me to getting this one wrong, this
For
specific
one,
one wrong.
when it talks about the son or comparing it to Jesus, it's always generic. It's never about an individual person.
Okay,
Take, for example, Isaiah 9:6.
is that the one where he'll be
Mm-hmm.
what I should know. I
Go
got
to
it in
it.
my head. Yeah, let me go. Isaiah. Let me find Isaiah. Wait a minute, where is Isaiah?
Now, the actual context, you could start in verse 1.
Yeah, this is the one. For unto us yeah, this is the one I was trying to remember. For unto us
But
a
you got to
child is
look at the
born.
surrounding context. Read verse 1 to 6 out loud so
Okay,
everybody can hear for the sake so they understand.
verse 1. Oh, Isaiah 9, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1. Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as war in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Thou hast multiplied the nation, and not increased the joy before thee according to the joy in harvest. And as men rejoice when they divide the spoil, for thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise, and garments rolled in blood. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
And keep going through 7.
All right. Verse 7. Of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this.
So notice how in this section that you just read, nowhere in there was it talking about a specific person. It was talking first about God and how in these lands they're dealing with war and affliction and even God's aspect of it. And we can go to chapter 8. This is a good example where the chapters continue from each other, where 8 is actually the beginning of the context. But nowhere in here did it bring up a specific person who is at that time. It brought up God's treatment of these. Then it brought up the people that walked in the darkness have seen a great light. Well, obviously, that's a metaphor for somebody who was blind, but now they understand. It's a metaphor for understanding. And then it goes into about the different troubles, like the land has gotten bigger, but nobody's having joy. So in other words, they may be enlarging, but they're getting more problematic, problem after problem after problem. And then points out, for thou hast broken the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulders, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. So now we have a comparison of what it was like with the day of Midian that we would get to. So we're seeing a comparison here, all metaphorical, nothing specific. And then we get into 5, talking about for every battle of the warrior. Well, for every battle of the warrior, does that mean it's talking about a specific soldier? No, that's talking about just for a warrior in general. So again, we're still dealing with a metaphor about what's going on in life. And then it said in the end of verse 5, but this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. So, in other words, kind of like how I've said before in a negative way, I don't never start the fire, but I will dang sure throw some gasoline on it.
Yeah, the joke we've been running for years.
Yeah. So, in a godly way, it's saying the same thing. It's like all these problems that are going on, they're not something to allow yourself to be burdened down, but rather let it be a fuel for your fire to live for God, because there's going to come a time where, as in 6 says, a child is born and a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. So, again, one thing that helps to differentiate between when we're talking about Christ and the prophecy of the Messiah versus if we're talking about somebody at the time is that the specificity. How specific is it? Now go back to how we read here. I'll put mine back on the screen. I mean, Chris is back on the screen. And then it said in verse 9 and 10, and I'll read it through to 11 and 12. Also, I will ordain a place for my people and will plant them, and they shall. Oh, wait, no. First off, going back, verse 6. No, was it 6? No, it was 9. Also, I will ordain a place for my people and will plant them, and they shall dwell in their place, and shall be moved no more. Neither shall the children of wickedness waste them any more as at the beginning. And since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, moreover, I will subdue all thine enemies. Furthermore, I tell thee that the Lord will build thee a house. And it shall come to pass when thy days be expired that thou must go to be with thy fathers. Right there. Where are David's fathers?
Oh, heaven.
Well, not heaven, paradise.
I mean, sorry, paradise, paradise.
Yeah, paradise. They've already passed on. So when David goes to be with his fathers, that means when David dies in the context. And then that I will raise up thy seed after thee. Well, if I'm raising up your seed, if I'm raising up your children, what am I going to be to your children from their
Like
perspective?
like a father, and that's exactly what made me think first of all King Solomon, because I think when King Solomon started that reign, David was dead, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. But keep in mind who he's talking to. He's talking to David, right?
Hmm.
David just asked God to build a house. That's what he wanted to do, to build a house for the ark. David, this entire time, except for his massive slip up he did with Uriah and his wife, except for that situation, David has been a servant of God. His
Hmm.
heart has been for God. And so, in response to this, what God is telling him, I will establish his kingdom. He shall build me an house, and I will establish his throne forever. So his throne will be established forever. So who are we talking about at this time? Now, we only know this because we've read this same subject before, right? So we know
Right,
he's talking about Solomon.
right.
So with that being said, knowing he's talking about Solomon, then and being David's seed that would come after and be in the kingdom, we know it can't be Jesus because it's talking about someone specifically. So that's your telltale sign to know it's not talking about Jesus. Is the context already speaking about somebody specific, or is it generic and open? If it's generic and open, there's a good possibility we're talking about either a metaphor or about the Messiah. But if it ever talks about someone specific already in mind, and we know who that person is, then it can't be Jesus because there's only one Jesus. And
I'm
keep in
putting it in.
mind also, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm putting it in my notes. But I'm glad you actually saw like how I was thinking that way. How, because I didn't want it to be like a far fetched like reason why I thought that.
No, no, I could see why you said that. Like, this is why I said about your guesses that are good guesses. There's a difference between a good guess and a bad guess. And I'll explain this every time if you guys need. A good guess keeps in mind the context and has a possibility to be right, if not for one part of the context. Whether it's the context of the question and it relates to what we read, or if it's just what we read, period. But a bad guess is a guess that has nothing to do with the question at all. Like it's completely didn't match up with the question at all. Or secondly, if if it doesn't show any way in the context as a possibility. Like here, where it says, I will be his father and he shall be my son. I could understand why someone would think that's talking about Christ, because this is God speaking. But that doesn't work because the context shows we were already talking about someone specifically, Solomon. That's why, like, even Chris's guess earlier, even though it was incorrect, his guess was a good guess. But Thomas's guess had nothing to do with the question. It was just a guess based on the words I said. And not even the question, the words in context of the question, but like a couple words of the word I said. That's where the difference lies. Does it actually match the question I'm asking, even if it's incorrect? And is it like completely debunked in what we read, or do you have to think deeper to debunk what we read? This is not as straightforward without getting that extra detail. And it wasn't in response to a question either. You just asked that of your own accord. So, anyways, one other thing I was going to say too, don't let things deceive you like establishing his kingdom. Remember this when we go through, when something drastic like that is brought up. These type of phrasings have been used before, and not just for God. Keep a mental note as best as you can what type of phrasings are only used towards God and what type of phrasings are used to kings and God, and what type of phrasings are used for everybody. And you'll start to notice that certain phrases are not just exclusive to God, they're used for all kinds of people. Whereas there are other ones that are specific to God. For example, sit thou on my right hand. The only one who gets to sit at the right hand of God is Jesus. The closest you can get is where there were two disciples of Jesus who asked to sit on his right and left hand. And when Jesus told them, when they asked him that, he said, you can die with me, you can do that part. But as towards who will sit on my right or left hand, that is not for me to say. No one knows, only the Father. So only one person can sit at the right hand of God, and that is Christ, the other form of God. Now then, does anybody have any questions or comments as we go to the final section? All right, then I'll go ahead and read. First Chronicles chapter 17 and verse 16 to 19. And David the king came and sat before the Lord and said, who am I, O Lord God? And what is mine house that thou hast brought me hitherto? And yet this was a small thing in mine eyes, O God. For thou hast spoken of thy servant's house for a great while to come, and hast regarded me according to the estate of a man of high degree, O Lord God. What can David speak more to thee for the honor of thy servant? For thou knowest thy servant. O Lord, for thy servant's sake, according to thine own heart, hast thou done all this greatness in making known all these things. In making known all these things. So we're finishing up these last four with David coming down to sit and speak before God, to pray to God, so to speak, and ask him, and he's just basically going off in gratitude and humbleness. Who am I? What is my house that you're bringing me here? In other words, I'm a nobody. Why are you doing right by me? Why are you doing so much for me? You speak of my house, which I am just your servant, but you're speaking of my house for a long time to come. Like if I'm somebody of high degree. In other words, you're talking to me like I'm somebody special, but I'm just an average guy. I'm a nobody. And then he says in his own name in third person, what can David speak more to thee for the honor of thy servant? In other words, God, I don't even know what else I could say for how much you honor me. I'm at a loss for words because you know me. And then in 19, for thy servant's sake, according to thine own heart, hast thou done all this greatness in making known all these great things. So, in other words, God, for my sake, according to your heart, you've done all these things and made all these things known to me. In other words, God, I'm not worthy of how much good you're doing for me. I don't deserve this greatness. I don't deserve everything you're doing for me. Now, we see in this with David a level of gratitude that we really have to question whether or not we have that same level of gratitude. Do you have that same level of gratitude? When's the last time you looked at how much mercy God has given you? How many times you could have died? And instead of just being judgmental on yourself, you also have that gratitude. God, I'm so thankful you didn't kill me off. As a matter of fact, on the other side of the positive, too, when's the last time you looked at all the opportunities that God has given you and been like, God, I'm so grateful? And been like, God, I'm so grateful. It's a little time of remembrance for it, keeping everything in mind, a little self reflection. See, if we go through this life not having gratefulness, not understanding who God is, we'll end up in positions where we might just lose everything. But if we take the time to put God first and we take the time to do the things that we know we need to do, and above all else, take the time to be thankful to God and to make the 100% effort to do what we can to follow, we know that God takes care of us. But just as with any contract, just as with true love of any kind, love is not unconditional. Love comes with conditions, and we need to hold up our end of the bargain. We can't be mad at God or mad at anybody else if life doesn't go our way when we're not doing our part. And if we are doing our part and things are not going good for the moment, maybe we need to rethink why they're not going good. Because if it's not about us doing wrong, then if there's some lesson to be learned or somebody we need to meet. But if we are doing wrong, there's a big telltale sign that's probably why we're not where we want to be in life, and probably why we're not as far along in God as we want to be. Now, with all that being said, does anybody have any comments or any questions before we pray it out? All right. Then go ahead and bow your heads as I go in and pray us out. Father, thank you for this time that you've given us to be able to read your word, to be able to understand everything we have, And they understand how David was and how you treated David and even his children, bringing him from humble beginnings to being king over Israel, bringing him from moments where he was a nobody and everything was not where it needed to be, but he was doing what he needed to do. And you brought him to be in charge, and not only to be in charge, but you called him, he was described in your word as a man after your own heart. And we just pray that through our self reflection and changes, that we four and more, whoever comes in this church, would become men and women that are after your own heart as well. And even more than David, not of the namesake, but of the amount of following and faithfulness that we have to be even greater servants to you than he was, if you're willing, Lord. In your Son's holy and precious name, Jesus Christ Yeshua. Amen.
Amen.
All right, everybody. Have a wonderful night, and I will talk to y'all tomorrow.